ahead and get started. And like I said, folks will probably come in and come out as we are having our session. But thank you everyone for joining, and special thanks to the folks on this panel. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But my name is Austin Stone. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Georgia in the Department of Geography, and am co-host or co-chair for the GIS Day Planning Committee along with Amanda. So we're really excited that this is going as smoothly as it is going given our virtual circumstances. But we are really excited to have this particular panel in place so we can get insight for how GIS is being used in the workplace. So I think we have a very unique panel that kind of shows all sorts of different applications of GIS in the workplace. So with that, I'll go ahead and ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll go ahead and start with David Shaw.
Hi, I'm David Shaw. I'm a business development manager at Futura GIS. We do GIS software, but we do a whole engineering and operations suite, primarily electric distribution utilities. And then we focus specifically on electric cooperatives. So my standard line is that I tend to fly into a major city, drive 2 to 3 hours out into the middle of nowhere, and that tends to be where our customers are. So these are all the people that were electrified in the 1930s, getting, that last mile of electric out to the, the final end. And then now one of the things that we're dealing with, and we'll probably talk about later, is we're beginning to see the same thing with fiber, getting connectivity out to those same, that person that truly is on the very end of the line, getting that out. As far as the GIS goes, that's the basis of everything we do. We are ESRI based, so that is the basis of all our software. And basically we add tools on top of that specifically for the utility. And that varies from, the GIS professional, who's somebody's in the office that their job really is the software, but we also do a lot of work with the field person. So a guy in the truck, an alignment who needs that data, needs that same, mapping, hierarchy data in his hands, because to him it's just another tool, just like a hammer or anything else. That that map is another tool in his tool belt for him to get that data and to share that data throughout the utility. He's the one actually observing it. You want to get that back into the office, get that out to the members, and ultimately get that data across everything. So that's where we specialize as far as GIS. We really are a very practical use of GIS. Although we do a lot of heavy data analytics in the back end, we have outage management, we have field solutions on the iPad. We sort of do, we capture a lot of screens throughout the utility, from, everybody in the office to everybody in the field to the CSRs, everybody in the utility. So that's in general what we do.
Great. Thanks, David. Yeah, it sounds like it's a pretty imperative piece to have, especially with the utility companies, and like you mentioned, getting the people on the last of the line, making sure that everyone's accounted for. So that's really unique. So really great to hear from Futura Systems. So let's hand it over to Shannon.
Hey, I work for Hexagon US Federal, which is part of Hexagon. And the branch that I work for, it focuses exclusively on US federal government. And we have a portfolio that includes solutions for geospatial intelligence, cybersecurity, among other things. My title is a geospatial analyst, and I have been working there for about 6 months now. It's the first job that I've had since graduation. And we use GIS in all of our work. And we focus on high quality geospatial intelligence mapping products.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. And then finally, let's hand it over to David Rickless.
Hey, my name's David Rickless. I'm a geospatial analyst also, and I work in the geospatial group at the CDC. It's called the Geospatial Research Analysis and Services Program. So I actually work on paper for a company called Perspecta, which is a government contractor IT consulting company, and they have a contract staffing this geospatial program. So it's a fairly large program, about 60 people, And we use GIS, is the core of the work that they do. And the applications are pretty wide ranging, from research to print maps. We still do a lot of print maps, to web GIS and application development. And we basically serve the geospatial needs of whatever other organizations within CDC are interested in that. So it seems to be a fairly large and also growing thing in the public health field. So this was sort of the first place I landed after I finished my master's at UGA in geography. I was a fellow in this program for about 1.5 years, and then I transitioned to this contractor position, which is where I'm at now.
Great. Thanks, David. And we do have 2 Davids in this session, so I will probably just be calling y'all by your first and last name. So awesome. So like I mentioned before, we definitely have a variety of use cases for GIS through our panelists. So this is going to be really exciting. I wanted to take a look back at the individuals just for a couple minutes, but I wanted to ask y'all what got y'all interested in GIS, and maybe it's you just stumbled on it or something, but like what kind of drives you, and why do you like working where you work in a GIS heavy company or organization? So we'll go ahead and hand that question off to Shannon.
So as far as how I got interested in GIS, my original career was in ecology and wildlife conservation. And I saw several scientists within the positions I held using GIS. And then when I decided to go back to my master's, I liked it so much that that's what I wanted to focus in. It's just so unique. There's so many different uses that you have for it. There's so many different career paths you can take with it. So it's kind of like an ever-changing puzzle. And it's fun. It's fun, and it keeps me interested in the work that I'm doing. So when I go to work each day, it's exciting. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. And now I'll just hand it over to David Rickless.
So I think it would probably be easier to say how I came into geography to begin with, which was from an interest in environmental science, environmental policy. And in my undergrad, the geography was sort of where I was directed for those sorts of things. And then I did my master's at UGA and did more of a focus in human geography, but used largely quantitative methods, which is, as you guys know, maybe kind of unique in that department for the social science side. And that always have seen myself sort of at that intersection of GIS methods and social science, human geography research questions. And so, to be honest, I wouldn't say I ever set out to be a GIS analyst as a career goal. Not that it's an unwanted thing, but it was not necessarily something I pursued. But I, found a position after school that allowed me to continue doing some of the research I was interested in, and still be around geographers and do that type of work. And so as for why I'm staying in it now, I would say I see it largely as a avenue to be doing more broad technology work, whether that means, learning new languages or new applications, but sort of a pathway into, analytics more broadly, which includes GIS. And I think we may talk about this more later, but I think that is an interesting thing where that fits in now, where GIS fits into what's broadly called analytics now. So that's sort of where I see myself, whatever that place is.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And now I'll hand it over to David Shaw.
I'm sort of the first case you mentioned. I sort of stumbled into this. My degree, or my study is actually in history, and my job before this was I ran Medieval Times in Atlanta, so not anything like this industry at all. Stumbled into it just as far as a job, you know, that things. But I wanted to address sort of what you asked is sort of what made me passionate about it, and to me, GIS is horribly empowering. Specifically, the first company I have and the company I'm with now work a lot with field solutions. And so the power to get that data about the map and about the utility to that guy in the field so he can make those decisions, you know, with more of a perspective than what he's looking at. You know, he's standing in there at the pole, he's having to make decisions on how we're going to hook up, how we're going to design the power, what we're going to do there. And he's got all that information at his fingertips. And we specifically work with disconnected solutions. So he doesn't even have to be, I mean, he could be rural enough that he doesn't have cell signal, but he can still have the whole GIS right there, you know, literally on the iPad in front of him. And then it's empowering the other way is that he then collects that data and that data then goes back to the GIS. So every day your maps get better and better and better instead of getting more and more out of date. I mean, the previous was literally they would print up a map book and there would be, you know, hundreds of page map book in the truck and you would look it up by grid. And so literally the day you printed that, that was out of date. And so it kept getting worse and worse and worse until you updated it again. And now GIS has reversed all that, which means now that guy out in the field and the guy in the office, they're more in sync. And so I love to see that. I specifically love to see it in the rural America because again, people think of, well, that's going to be back in technology. That's going to be different. But instead, we're getting to see that some of the more advanced technologies, you know, they're able to adapt to that situation. So really empowering those people in GIS. You know, Esri talks about system of engagement, and I'm a big proponent of that, you know, thing. It's not just a system of record. That's the first step. But the second step is then to engage everybody, empower them to do that and get that. And that's what I get really excited about, you know, again, from my background, just getting to that extra step.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. And actually, I kind of wanted to take how you answered this question and kind of ask Shannon and David, what makes y'all passionate about where y'all are working right now? And we'll go ahead and just hand it over to Shannon.
I don't know. It's a lot of different things that makes me passionate about my work. I like the team that I work with. I like my coworkers. I've gotten to know them even though I've been fully remote since I've started. I like what we do. I like the aspect of creating these, you know, mapping products that are high quality and just very detail oriented. And at first I was working on the production side of things, and now more so I work on the quality control and quality assurance. So it's even more of a level of detail and a little bit of, you know, helping some of the newer hires out. So it's a really great fit for me for what I do. And looking at satellite imagery, you know, throughout the day and, you know, making those analyzations, that's just something I really liked doing that when I was in graduate school. And it was amazing that I got offered a job that had that right out of grad school.
Great, thanks, Shannon. And over to David Rickless.
So I think broadly, I would say the CDC is a cool organization to be supporting. It's it can be very like convoluted and slow moving sometimes, but they're obviously doing really important work right now. And so the idea that you know, what I'm putting 40 hours a week into is directly or indirectly, you know, I'm sometimes pretty far removed from the actual like on the ground work, but the idea that I'm contributing to that, you know, that it's a not to be like too cheesy, but it's like a greater good type cause, you know, it's motivating. And I think you can find that in a lot of different things. It doesn't need to be public health necessarily, but you know, I like that about it. And more specifically to the work I end up doing, I do a lot of work on environmental health projects and environmental hazards, which has just always been an interest of mine. Like I used to be on the advocacy side of environmental work, so it's interesting to be now on the government side and be seeing, you know, when a community wants some sort of action taken, seeing things that are done to, frankly, to try to help them and to try to be, to assess their needs on the government side. So that sometimes is not like on a day-to-day basis the most exciting work. It's, you know, sometimes a lot of going through spreadsheets and, you know, digitizing things and your basic GIS tasks. But in terms of subject matter, it's compelling and, you know, in line with what I've always been fascinated by.
And that's such a good point. Yesterday, when we had our panel discussion, GIS around campus, we asked, you know, what people or what they thought, you know, is the most important thing for students to understand when pursuing a career using GIS. And the fundamentals of using GIS was a pretty popular suggestion. And so even though like it might be doing a lot of fundamental basic GIS, I mean, there's such a important way to use it. Like it means so much more than you think it does. So that's a great insight from you, David. And actually, I wanted to ask a similar question to y'all. So like seeing how what the workforce looks like, and especially in y'all's unique positions, what are some things that you would recommend to students in terms of like either hard skills or soft skills that are really important in your company or organization? So we will go ahead and ask David Shaw.
I mean, I would echo of obviously some of the stuff they said yesterday. I mean, the fundamentals are, you know, basic GIS knowledge, you know, I mean, specifically in our industry, obviously it's Esri based, but it could be a wide variety of different types of GIS. But that is, and the reason I would say that is because, and I think everybody here would agree that each of our industries has a whole set of specific knowledge that it's unlikely that you're going to learn in school. I mean, certainly, unless you've dealt with electric distribution, you're not going to know all the tools that we've built on top of a GIS. But I mean, we're going to teach you those. I mean, the company that does that, we're going to grab you for that skill set. You know, we want to be able to start, you know, steps ahead because you have those fundamentals, you know, and have that basis. The flip side of that, if you talk about more of, you know, soft skills, I mean, that flexibility. I mean, GIS it's everywhere. I mean, there's not a company on this planet that couldn't use a GIS person to do something, whether it be analytics or, I mean, just to say it's one piece of it is obviously, I mean, again, so having that fundamentals, but understanding like, hey, what are the ways I could take these fundamentals and stretch it out, and just being able to, you know, see that. So when you go to a company and they go, well, hey, we do GIS, but we do it this little way differently, understand that GIS really can't be pigeonholed anymore. It's not just for a guy in a windowless room that's doing data work all the time. That's part of what it is. But there's a huge amount of other stuff that becomes part of that. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's such a good point, David. I'll actually hand this question back over to the other David.
Yeah, I think about that a lot actually, because I'm only a few years out from being a student. It's longer than it feels like, but I do think about that a lot. And so probably, you know, maybe it's early on in my career for me to really make a lot of judgments on it. But what I see, because I've been, you know, around GIS people and other technical people in a large organization, and I've also been on the interviewing, hiring side occasionally. I think definitely I would echo the flexibility, and I would add to that translational skills. I think are very important, unless you're going to work for somewhere that exclusively does GIS, and even then your clients are not going to be GIS people. So really important, I think, to be able to take the technical language of your field and translate it to, you know, whatever, not necessarily to like lay person talk, but to the technical language of another field, you know. So I work with a lot of like extremely educated health scientists and similar people. And, you know, a lot of it is translating between the language of epidemiology and the language of GIS and data, which I'm still working on. And so communication, really important, really good way to stand out among technical people. On the hard skills side, I do think some familiarity with like the software development process and what you know, production software looks like is probably, I don't know, this is kind of debatable, but maybe more important than any specific language, because I think you can learn Python or you can learn R, and that's a good idea. You're going to eventually, if you're doing GIS, probably. But what I think is really helpful, regardless of what specific technical skills you have, is having just a familiarity with like software and computer application development work and scripting in your field, so that you can then figure out what you need to, you know, when you need to learn something new. So that's that we could probably have a whole panel just on the skills stuff, but that's sort of what I'm thinking right now.
Just a quick follow-up. What typically what software do you normally use?
We are heavily invested in the Esri stack. So we, you know, all the current stuff, ArcGIS Pro, etc. And increasingly, we get a lot of requests for dashboards and interactive maps. So we do a lot in ArcGIS Online, and we have a on-premises ArcGIS Enterprise instance that we do a lot of work in. Me personally, I kind of use Esri out of necessity because I know that it generally has a way to do what I want, but I'm leaning more toward working in R and Python and Jupyter notebooks increasingly. So mostly Esri as a group, but personally I'm I would rather, you know, write some basic code if I'm able to and have the chance to.
Great. Yeah, that's some really good insight. It sounds like even on at Futura, sounded like they were doing a lot of Esri related software, so, or using that type of software. So really interesting to hear, you know, like what companies use what, which is actually, we're going to hand it over to Shannon real quick. And I know I kind of asked this question a couple of questions ago now at this point, but what would you recommend to students? Like what types of hard and soft skills would you recommend students to kind of develop while looking for a career in GIS?
I definitely think both Davids made really good points about having, you know, the fundamentals of GIS, just the basics, and having a basic knowledge of how to do that, because David is right, or David Shaw, that whenever you do go to, you know, whatever job you have after graduation, they are going to want things done a specific way in accordance to their guidelines. So they're going to be training you in their workflow. So, and like David Shaw said, that's not going to be something that you would have learned in school. But for me, I think that, you know, recommending what should students look for, I think take as many classes as you can in GIS and remote sensing, volunteer on different volunteer on different projects, and maybe integrate different softwares, whether it's open source GIS, whether it's coding or any other type of, you know, gadgets that we have on hand in the geography department within your thesis or within your class projects, because then you have at least a working knowledge of different softwares and skills. And within that, not only does that make you more sellable on the job market, but it also shows you what you like to do. You know, because you really want to know what you like to do and what you don't like to do. You know, if you don't really like coding, then you probably don't want to take a job that's really coding heavy. But as you know, David Rickless said, most jobs are going to want you to have at least a basic knowledge of coding, and that is important, just even if it's basic enough just to automate a workflow. So the more hard skills that you can have, the better.
Definitely. And just building off of that, you know, are you in a position to where you are coding for your job often, or are you more using a software? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, at this point, I'm not doing any coding, but I do use ESRI products and also another similar product. It's called GeoMedia.
Wow, I've never heard of that. I'd like
Yeah,
to
a
learn
lot
a
of
little
people
bit more
haven't.
about that.
But it's really similar to, the sort of things that any kind of GIS platform can use as
Okay.
far as spatial analysis and digitizing and things like that.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to look into that. That sounds awesome. And since we're just talking about the software side, David Shaw, I mean, you mentioned that Futura offers a whole package of capabilities for your partners or your customers. Could you talk a little bit more about the software that y'all develop and you provide?
Yeah, so I mean, again, the core of everything we do is Futura GIS, which is an Esri GIS, it's an Arc Enterprise solution, just because we've been doing it long enough that that was the prevalent solution, and our industry hasn't quite. I mean, although they do some of the stuff with the online and pro, a lot of them haven't made that move. Utilities are they're not change adverse, but they do change a little slower than some of the other markets. The nature of keeping the power on, I guess. So GIS is sort of the focus of what it is, but then ultimately GIS as a storage medium is only sort of the beginning. What they're really trying to do is get advantages. When you look at a cooperative, it's usually they keep the staff fairly thin. It's not your bureaucracy doesn't get very bloated. Multiple people have multiple hats. So a lot of our other products are very focused on getting a specific thing done. OMS, which is outage management. Again, a storm comes through, the lines go down, you lose 75% of your system because a hurricane's gone through. Now you've got to take that GIS data, what was on that pole, what was there. Now we've got to get it replaced. I've got to get a line crew out there. Inspection, I want to go out there after the fact and inspect the damage, or I want to go out before the fact so I know what's there. So when the damage does happen, I have that reported. That would be, we've got an ArcGIS runtime environment on iOS. And that's taking your entire GIS, putting it on an iPad, allowing you to click the point, collect data on that, ship it back to the GIS. Service orders, people want to get power cut on, cut off. I mean, that's ultimately, the GIS is the core of everything you do, and is ultimately, it is the system of record, it is important, but every time we go into a utility, they've got an issue of they're like, I have this problem, I need this specific thing solved. How can I use GIS to do that? So a lot of our software is doing that empowerment staking. You're designing new lines. Well, where's the new lines going to be? I want to draw that out. I want to tell you what units are. I want to update the GIS, from that. And it's mirroring processes that have been around before computers. I mean, these people have been doing this process since the 1930s when they were building it, but now you can't count on, they had grid-based systems that were numbering, and an alignment could tell you by the number where that is. Oh, I know exactly where that is. Well, that's not in the modern day. Type the number into a search engine, get it out there, show, give me turn-by-turn directions, get me to that location. That personal memory of that person who has been there for 30 or 40 years. Well, when that person retires, you want that memory to be corporate memory. So the GIS will hold that and pass it on to the next generation, and again, improve that data on and on. So that's where, again, tools are very, engineering and operations, we're very practical, group of people. Now we're getting into the analytics stuff. We're beginning to see, now that we can prove that the analytics also have practical value, we're beginning to get to more of those advanced functions, but it's a lot about, that tool in the tool belt.
Definitely. Thanks, David. And I kind of wanted to take a short intermission real quick to let the audience know that if y'all have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat, and we'll be happy to read them out. But while I say that, I'm going to ask another question. We've kind of danced around this topic all session, but I'd love, and we would love to learn a little bit more about what a typical day would be at the office. And granted, we know that things are a little different right now with COVID-19. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how a normal day would look like and what a normal day looks like now. So let's start with, well, actually, this is interesting. So I'll start with Shannon, but she has a unique perspective on all of this. So I'll start with you, Shannon.
So my job is 100% remote. I've been there, as I mentioned before, for 6 months. When I started, the intention was that we would be in the office by June. But as of yet, I still have not actually been to the office. But I did relocate to St. Louis for my position. And again, that just happened because of COVID. And it's definitely brought its own set of challenges when you are training remotely, when you're starting a new position and you don't have someone who can come behind the screen with you, that they're just walking around the office and checking up on your work. So really what that entails is being just communicating so openly with like your supervisor or with your other coworkers, like sending a lot of emails go out throughout the day. We might have some sort of, similar to a Zoom meeting or, though we don't use Zoom, or using a chat forum to discuss your work and to just coordinate with people and make sure you're on track. So it was definitely a surprise, and it was definitely kind of a bigger challenge, but I don't mind working remotely at this point. It's because it's what I'm used to. I'm not actually sure what a normal day would be. And I know that there's been talks, throughout the GIS or technical field that at least, that the new trend will be to keep some people at 100% remote or moving to a hybrid model, because really we don't know how much longer this is going to be going on. And I think now people within the different companies, myself included, are just, really getting used to it.
Yeah, I think your perspective kind of comes from this, it was already remote once you started. So it's kind of interesting to see how companies might be thinking about transitioning to a way where kind of, is a seamless transition back to normalcy, which this might be something a little more normal now. But anyways, let's hand it over to David Shaw. I think we had a conversation before about a transition between how companies view working remotely and stuff. So I think this will be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little bit more just because of the audience, a little bit more about what our GIS. I'm in sales, marketing, business development, so my day is chaotic and never the same one day to the next. But if you talked about somebody who was doing the working with our customers directly on GIS or our various products, I mean, the previous model would have been usually a discussion. Then you would go on site, usually doing training, doing configuration on site with that person, really, going out to wherever that was. Because, I mean, we're in the cooperative business. It's very, very handshake, very small town. I mean, they like that thing, that touch. It's changed. Now, I mean, that doesn't change the fact that the first 30 minutes of every call is about their kids or what's going on in their world. Or, I mean, again, the cooperative business is that type of business. So even remotely, that's true. But we slowed down for a couple months while everybody sort of adjusted. But then once they adjusted, actually, it picked up to more accelerated because there was a lot less of that people coming by their office and interrupting them. So a lot of people, all those projects they had been putting off, like, man, I really wish I could clean up this data in my GIS. Now all of a sudden it was like, wait, I got time. I'm at home, or if I'm in the office, but nobody else is here, because the GIS guy would often still go in, but nobody else, the linemen are all out, and then the rest of the office is empty. So we really started getting a lot of those interactions all digitally. And we're probably going to change as a company. We were very much a 5 days in the office. Everybody came in, and we're in Atlanta, so traffic is always an issue. We're completely remote. It hasn't affected the bottom line at all. In fact, we had some of our best months ever during this period of time because people are doing all that extra work. And so we're looking to maybe go to a 2 days in the office, 3 days out. Standard method for everybody. I mean, I've always been on that method because I'm still in Athens, so I don't have to commute into Atlanta every day, thank God. But still, we're thinking that everybody will go to maybe a Tuesday, Thursday method. And our customers, we just had a remote training in October. We did all of our training completely remote. I got the reviews back. People loved it. We had to change the format a little bit to make it fit the virtual environment. But the truth is, people are, they're getting it done. I mean, everybody's around the country still got to get their job done, especially, again, you can't turn off the power, you got to get it done. So they're finding a way, and it's turning out, I think, we've always theorized that this was possible. We've always, sort of just not done it because, well, what if it doesn't work? Well, we sort of got forced into it, but I think it's going to be a good change. And I think all businesses are going to go. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who knows some of the larger businesses that's talking about, selling a huge high rise in Texas because they don't need it. They're going to move to a smaller office because offices are going to become a different environment. And I think that that's important. And GIS is going to benefit from that because now you're physically not going to get out there to see it. Well, if I want to see it remotely, I want to see the picture, I want to see what's in the field. How am I going to learn that? Oh, look, GIS is going to tell me that. It's going to have that data. It's going to have a 3D LiDAR photo and show me what's going on. And so I think that this is a good place to be for all y'all that are watching these. You've made a good choice.
Great, thanks, David. And I'd love to hear from David Rickless.
Yeah, so it's first pre-COVID times, honestly, very standard office job in a cubicle farm with like a Keurig machine in the break room and everything, and your typical like how was your weekend? Mondays, right? That sort of thing. So that's that. I won't go into detail about that because I think everybody watched The Office. But I would say in terms of like my personal day, maybe something that's that's worth noting is just the way the projects that I get usually shake out. So I'm usually working on juggling several different long-term projects, which is something I got very used to in grad school. And, so that was a nice transition to like, okay, I'm used to multitasking. It's, prioritizing, that's fine. So I'm usually working on several long-term projects. With regard to those, I pretty much manage my day how I want to, not a whole lot of direct supervision of like what I work on at any given hour of the day or any day of the week, which is very nice. And then at any time we'll get some requests for smaller specific mapping products or analyses or something. And some of those are, environmental health studies. Some of them are just really random things. Like I was asked to map the location of different species of bats around the world for like the disease or vector-borne disease group. So a combination of long-term projects and, sort of short turnaround requests. And we do some travel. I have not personally done a lot, but there's people that work more on the global health and emergency response side. And so they've will often travel, again, pre-COVID to various countries for polio or Ebola related work and that sort of thing. That all sort of stopped with COVID because we're not allowed to do non-essential travel at the moment. And then with regard to the transition to working remotely, I mean, like the others have said, it's a pretty natural setup. I really didn't need to be like in the office most of the time anyway, so that was it's fine to just be able to stay home on those times. Trying to think if there's anything really notable about the remote situation. I would just say, yeah, I mean, I would echo what David Shaw said, that it has gone pretty smoothly. I mean, we have management that's somewhat on the conservative side with regard to working from home. We were working from home a couple days a week, but they didn't want to do more than that before. And we've really not had any trouble. I think they might be, slowly being won over. We do a lot of capacity building, and so I and a few other people were scheduled to be several different cities around the country doing trainings to local health departments this year, which was all canceled, of course, but we delivered the trainings over Zoom online, and it worked fine, and people liked it. So I like being in person. I like talking to people in person and having that social aspect. But in terms of, working efficiently and getting the important work done, it seems to be going smoothly.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds like a pretty, no, I wouldn't say seamless, but the transition between the online or the remote work seems to have gone pretty well. So it sounds like GIS is something that is, versatile. You don't have to necessarily be around everyone since it is pretty heavily a computer-based type of position. But great. I did see that Amanda had a question for all of the panelists, so I would like her to see what she has to say.
Okay, and I can unmute myself here. So yes, I have it's related to social sciences and communicating the technology to the community. And I'll start with David Shaw because so when I was doing my master's research in New Mexico, we worked a lot with small town communities. And I was talking to them about GIS and remote science. And some of the feedback I got from some of the small towns were that they just didn't want it. They were afraid of technology. And even some of the small towns didn't have electricity and they didn't want electricity because they'd lived their whole life without it. What are your experiences in communicating with small towns? And is there any sort of resistance in bringing in utilities to these places that are very remote?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss to say that there's not, people, well, if you're going to put connectivity out here, you're going to be able to, track me. I mean, I'm seeing a lot more of this in Starf, as far as fiber build is the current big thing as far as that goes, hey, if I'm going to run fiber out here, do I really need this? But I mean, I will say that resistance is becoming a lot smaller. I mean, again, everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, everybody wants that. And we have the benefit that usually, we're usually dealing with the cooperative, and the cooperative is already connected to that in community. So I would say if you're trying to go out like in a situation you want that local actor that is going to champion you, because they're going to see, they don't know you from anybody. But if I go in, so what I'm doing is I'm empowering the cooperative. Well, the cooperative is their neighbor. It's the guy next to them that's going to, and literally that's what, if my power goes out and I'm on a cooperative, I'll literally go ask my neighbor, like, hey, you work for the cooperative, why's my power out? It's that sort of, so there's a different bond there. And again, rural electrification had that same problem, what it was. And I think putting fiber out, people are, we even have that, we deal with like AVL. I mean, we have linemen that are like, well, I don't want an AVL in my truck because I don't want you to know where my truck is. I don't want you to be tracking me. And you get over that, like, by showing them the benefit, like, well, hey, I know you don't want this. Or a good example would be, mapping, as far as, putting a map in the truck. It was a big deal. Like, well, I don't want a computer in my truck. I'm going to have to deal with all that out. Well, once we put this all on an iPad, you'd be like, go to the lineman and be like, hey, and here's an iPad. And it's like, ooh, I get an iPad? Don't issue it to the co-op, issue it to the person, so he gets to take it home and get used to the technology and integrate with that. So you can get over that by giving them first, getting a connection, a person that is one of them to champion it for you. So I'd say that's first step. And then the second step is to, get them to adapt the technology as a whole. Don't just show them the use case. It's like, I'm not giving you this technology because you're doing something for me. I'm giving you this technology because it's going to do something for you. And I think if you can do that, then they, some of those people, linemen who have been like, I'll never put a computer in my truck, have become some of the biggest proponents because it makes their job easier. Well, so what it used to take me 4 hours to do, I can do in 4 minutes. And it's like, man, they're all about saving time. Nobody wants to spend that extra time outside in the heat when they can, get back in their air conditioned truck or the office. So they're pro at once you show them the actual use case, from my perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear a perspective from somebody who's on the developing side and communicating. And I have a similar question for David Rickless. Coming from a governmental standpoint and trying to relate information to the public, what is the resistance when it comes towards government interactions with community perception of what's going on?
I think it's a very important question for sure. I don't personally interact with the public. I have made visualizations and maps for people who do. And so a lot of that is for the environmental health studies that the CDC or a branch of the CDC does. And in those cases, oftentimes it's the community that has actually petitioned to have the study done because they're concerned about a source of contamination in their community. And generally, they're fairly receptive from what I've seen. And I think the key with that is thinking about the visualization side, you know, not just making a map, but how do we communicate the data that's really relevant to them in a way that makes sense, which is different from communicating it in an academic paper. You know, you want it to be very straightforward. We also think a lot about graphic design theory, for lack of a better word, like how people perceive things. You know, like examples like we're asked not to use like red and green to indicate the level of contamination, because you know, you see red and you think, oh, it's dangerous. And things like that, thinking about how to communicate with them on their terms, but generally pretty receptive. One thing that's maybe a little more of a challenging case, which again has not really been me directly, but I've sort of been working tangentially to it, is the COVID related visualizations that we've done and that go to the public. And those can be truly a challenge because people have a lot of opinions about how that data should be portrayed. There's obviously a lot of opinions about you know, the extent to which the data are being transparently shared. And so people are very aware of that. And I've definitely seen some situations where one of the maps or something or charts that we produced for this public-facing application was kind of being roasted on Reddit or something, or Twitter. And knowing the backstory, there's like pretty good reasons why they made the design choices they did, but people still took issue with it. So to get to the point on that, I would say, especially dealing with this sort of, I guess, high profile things, just really thinking about what people will perceive and different ways that it can be interpreted. And the fact that increasingly people understand that sort of classic concept in geography, which is that maps and visualizations are not really neutral necessarily. You know, they're not necessarily objectively portraying reality, because you have to make decisions about what goes into them. So I think understanding people will interpret things that way is very important to sort of head off the criticism.
Thank you, David. Yeah, yesterday, Jimmy Nolan had mentioned a book called How to Lie with Maps, and it talks about, from a cartographer's standpoint, how to create maps so that they're more engaging to the audience so that they can be understood. So that's really a good thing to keep in mind. Now, my last question that I have is for Shannon. I know Geospatial, Hexagon Geospatial isn't quite as involved with the community as other government institutions, or like David Shaw does in his work, but how do you see your work benefiting the community around you?
So with that, I personally don't have any community interaction. A lot of our work is contract work through NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So in my branch of Hexagon, we deal with them, which is a government organization, and not necessarily, well, we don't deal at all with community stuff. At least I don't. So I don't have a lot to add like the David Shaw and David Rickless did. So.
Okay, thank you.
I did actually have a question for David Rickless. You mentioned about the map that kind of got passed around on Reddit and people misinterpreted things. Did CDC issue a response and trying to explain why they did things the way they did, or did they just kind of let it lie?
I don't remember the exact details of what the issue was with this one that I'm thinking of, but Generally, it's they might revise it. They might add some footnotes to the application. I don't think it wasn't like it wasn't a big enough thing that they needed to really say anything, as a response. But it's I think, what was it? It may have been something related to just like classification schemes, and a lot of that is sort of putting more explanation in there about like what this actually means, so that people will hopefully interpret it correctly. So it wasn't like a crisis. It was more of an example of like, think about how people will see it.
Well, but I mean, I will say, I mean, generally, I mean, as far as an industry goes in general, that's exciting that, GIS would even be in a position that Reddit would think it was controversial enough to contact. I mean, imagine, 20 years ago, that you'd be lucky if anybody saw a map outside of, a magazine or someplace that was printed. The fact that it was, and especially if you look at the, the John Hopkins board that Esri certainly talks about all the time, and I mean, that stuff is core to everything that we do nowadays. And so, I mean, although it means that our jobs, we have to be a little bit more careful. The fact that, our jobs are all at the same sense created by the fact that, that's out there. GIS is ubiquitous now, not just for a selected few, which is awesome. That's cool to hear.
Yeah, really good point.
Awesome. Well, great questions. And I just want to open it up to the audience once more. If y'all have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. But I'll go ahead and just continue the conversation. So where could we learn more about your companies, your groups, and what y'all are doing? And then also if there are opportunities or resources for students to access. And we'll go ahead and ask Shannon for that.
Hexagon has a great website that goes into detail about the different branches that they have, different news releases, and different products that we offer. So there's a pretty extensive website. Just Google Hexagon US Federal and it should come right up.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. And over to David Rickless.
So the CDC Geospatial program actually just put out a public-facing website, and it's called Place and Health. It's kind of a long URL, but you can just search CDC Place and Health, and it's really cool, highlights a lot of the work that they do there. As far as the Perspecta company, I mean, they have a website. It's probably not that interesting for students. It's because it's a really large company and this is like a small part of what they do. But definitely, yeah, if you're looking for, they have job listings, of course, on there. But if you're looking for information about the CDC geospatial work, definitely that Place and Health website should be really interesting.
Great. And we'll hand it over to David Shaw.
Obviously, if you want to know more about us, we're at futuragis.com, and that's got to get in on our products and talk about we are. I would take, and I talked a little bit about Austin before this, I would take an opportunity for those people who are in GIS to sort of talk about rural electric cooperatives. If you are looking, I'm a proponent of the industry in general, not just because they're my customers, but it is one of the few places you can still be in a job for 30 years that has pensions that, if you want a really good technical job and still want to live in your small town, maybe you come from, a cooperative is an awesome job. They're great people. It's still a handshake business. It still has the advantages of a high-tech company, but also has the advantages of rural America. So if you're looking for that, and they're just often overlooked. People don't think of, small town America as a place, but now that we have connectivity and GIS is everywhere. So, if you're looking for that type of a good job with good pay where you can, really control your own department, you'll probably be one of 2 or 3 GIS people. So you really get to have your own domain and you sort of get to rule it. I'd highly recommend, looking at that industry. We'd love for you to look at our company as well, but I really am a bigger proponent of the industry in the sense of that there's a lot of good GIS jobs, and they need people just like y'all to get out there and apply, because they often get overlooked by the bigger city jobs. And I think they're better jobs and better communities from my personal perspective.
Awesome. Well, it is 5 minutes till. And so I just wanted to wrap things up. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and huge thanks to David, and Shannon. Y'all are great to have on, and I think that there's going to be a lot of useful information that's going to be able to be accessed after we post this on YouTube. So a lot of folks will be interested in hearing about all of this. So this was fantastic. Definitely felt like we covered a wide variety of GIS in the industry. So I'm super happy with how this turned out, and this was great. And I did just want to briefly mention a couple of things that we have going on for the rest of the day. So I'm just going to talk through the schedule. So it is 1 p.m. now. So at 2, if you're in Athens, we are doing a live drone demonstration in the geography lawn, and that's just right outside of the geology building. That'll be hosted by Dr. Sergio Bernardez. It'll be a good chance to learn a bit more about how drones are being used for geospatial purposes in GIS. And it's kind of cool because he does now have a drone that is about as big as me. So it's, and I guess to put that in perspective, I'm 5'7". So it's a little shorter than me, but that's going to be really cool. I'm sure he's going to bring that out. It sounds like a legitimate helicopter when it flies. It's pretty cool. But you'll also learn a bit more about the sensors that you can attach to the drones as well. And it'll be a good opportunity to just see how that's being used. And then at 5 p.m. today, we'll actually pick up another panel session, including Dr. Sergio Bernardez, in a GIS and imagery panel. So this will be a good chance to learn more about how we use imagery as a source for GIS. So that'll be really interesting. And you'll get to learn a little bit more about application-specific uses, which I think is really unique. And also Caroline Nairn, who's been hosting our Zoom meeting for the past 3 days, she'll be on that panel as well. So it'll be cool to hear from her and her research. And then finally, David Rickless will return this evening for a keynote talk. He'll talk a little bit more about his group within the CDC. And David, maybe if you had a little 10-second spiel about what you might be talking about, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm just going to give an overview of how the CDC uses GIS from my point of view, because I think a lot of people are really surprised that they hire geographers. So it's sort of a good news if you're a geographer story, but also hopefully an interesting look at some of the projects that we work on and, you know, the types of things we do.
Great. Great. Well, we're very much looking forward to it. And again, we will pick up even more events tomorrow. So we have a Women in GIS panel at 2 p.m. And we have some student presentations at 5 p.m. And then we'll finally conclude with a NASA Develop talk. And then we'll, the co-hosts, or I keep saying co-hosts, the co-chairs and the planning committee will join for some concluding remarks. This has been fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining in and participating. We look forward to seeing where all of these this online content goes, and hopefully a lot of people will learn more about GIS in the industry. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.